Hello, welcome to this introduction to a great airplane. In this program, we'll bring you a short history of the Cessna 195 series, differences between models, visits with owners, tours of restoration and engine shops, and things you should be aware of if you're in the market for a Cessna 195. But first, let me emphasize this is not a checkout tape. No video, book, or film can substitute for competent flight instruction. Nor in this brief program can we tell you everything about the airplane. Our purpose is to give you a quick summary of the good points and the weaknesses of the airplane and include some interviews with very knowledgeable people. And we'll close with an introductory flight. We were inspired to produce this video by the many inquiries and questions we get at Oshkosh and other fly-ins around the country. People always coming up to us and saying, "I want a 195. What can you tell me about this airplane?" If you're one of those people, I hope we'll answer most of those questions with this program. This old airplane has been a part of our lives for almost 4 decades. And needless to say, I've got quite a bit of time in it. But that doesn't make me the world's foremost 195 expert, no way. Much of what you hear today will be strictly my opinion, and take it for what it's worth. I'm sure that some may disagree with a point here and there, and that's okay. But if you can take all of this stuff and put it together and make an informed decision, and we've helped you significantly in that process, then we will have accomplished our purpose. In December of 1944, the prototype of what was to become the Cessna 195 made its first flight. Known as the P-80, it used as many of the T-50, the bamboo bomber or spruce goose parts, as possible. It was powered by the 245 Jacobs engine. It had a T-50 cowl and sat on the brand new Steve Whitman designed spring steel landing gear. The cantilever wing was all metal, but the fuselage was welded steel tube and fabric covered. It closely resembled the great Cessna Airmaster of the 1930s. Well, it was designated the Model 190 in 1945 after being extensively redesigned and now included an all-metal fuselage and the distinctive bubble cowl you see here. A second ship was flown in 45 with the 300 horsepower Jacobs. And the third airplane was built that year and flown with the 240 Continental. Both airplanes had good performance, so the company decided to produce 2 versions, the 190 with the Continental and the 195 with the 300 Jacobs. The 195 received its type certificate in June 12th of 1947, and the 190 came along about 3 weeks later. In 1950, Cessna brought out the 195A with the 245 Jacobs. And in 1952, the 195B came along with the 275 Jacobs. The last airplane rolled off the line in 1954. A total of 1,182 airplanes were built, 1,183 if you want to count the prototype, and included 233 190s, 866 195s, and 83 of the military LC-126s. The Cessna 195 was approved for wheels, floats, and skis. And let me tell you, if you're seriously interested in a Cessna 195 on floats, probably the most knowledgeable person in the operation of float-equipped 195s is Roger Currier of the Currier Flying Service in Greenville Junction, Maine. He operates 2 or 3 float-equipped 195s and would be happy to talk to you about them. His number's right here on the bottom of the screen. He told me that a Cessna 195 on floats performs about like a Cessna 180 without flaps. Over the last 30 years or so, there have been some modifications come along that we should talk about. In the late 1960s, Page Aeromotive in Oklahoma City, who at that time owned the Jacobs type certificate, took the basic 245, installed a Garrett Air Research turbo, boosted the horsepower to 350. There are not too many of those around. But we'll talk more about that mod when we get to the engine segment and talk with Steve Curry. One of the most valuable mods is the Cleveland brake conversion. Now, the original Goodyears were adequate, barely. But now parts are getting rather hard to come by. The more modern Cleveland brakes are much more powerful. And if you're not careful, you can either put the airplane on its nose or damage the gearbox, because really it's more brake than the airplane was designed for, but they're great. I highly recommend the Cleveland brakes. Several years ago, Ray's Aircraft Service in Porterville, California, came out with a locking tail wheel. I've not had any experience with it, but I've been told that it helps a lot on rollout after landing, and boy, that is important. Okay, now let's go talk about some of the more significant differences between models. That is, if my 72-year-old knees will let me get up. Throughout the 7-year production run of the Cessna 195, the company made many evolutionary changes. But the first big change came along with the 195B in 1952. At that time, the light gear was introduced along with the crosswind gear. Now, the light gear was obviously lighter and thinner than the heavy gear. It was also much springier, and I believe that made it a little bit more forgiving. The crosswind gear was Cessna's attempt to make the airplane more forgiving on the ground. Remember, the 195 was competing with the Bonanza and the Navion, which were both tricycle-geared airplanes and much easier to handle on the ground. This was becoming an important issue as more businessmen were learning to fly, and they didn't want to fool with developing the skill required to handle a heavy tail dragger. If a pilot touched down in a slight crab, the crosswind wheels would jump out of the detent, swivel about 30 degrees, and allow the airplane to proceed down the runway kind of sideways. It looked silly, but undoubtedly it saved some airplanes. By the way, if an airplane is equipped with wheel pants, it does not have the crosswind gear. The next big change that occurred happened at serial number 16083, which was late in the 1953 model year. The model in production at that time, remember, was the Model 195B. First thing they did was change the length of the flap. This is a small flap. In 1954 model, after 16083, the flap was extended this far. Now, the flaps are electrically operated. They're either all down or all up is a normal position. There's no need to stop them intermediately, though you can do that. Remember, though, they're all drag. There's no lift whatsoever in those flaps, and they're never used for takeoff. The pitot was also relocated from its original position on the leading edge to a new position just after the leading edge on the bottom. And the static ports were removed from the original location in the pitot tube and relocated to a point right here on both sides of the airplane. Also, the elevator shape was changed, and the trim tab was redesigned. All models of the 195 and the 190 had a retractable landing light. One light on the left was standard, but two lights were optional, the one on the left and the one on the right. It takes 15 seconds for those lights to come down and illuminate, and they draw an awful lot of power. A neat feature on the 195 also is a retractable step. Well, there you are. But this by no means covers everything about the history of the 195 and model differences. But I think we've hit the high points. As our title suggests, we've covered what you need to know to get you off to a good start in your search for a Cessna 195. Now, for a fabulous history about the development of the 195, I suggest a book by a former Cessna flight test engineer, Bill Thompson. Bill was deeply involved with the 195 in the development phase. His book is titled Cessna Wings for the World, the Cessna Single Engine Development Story. It's available from the author, and I'll list his address at the end of the tape. Also, there are two type clubs, and you should belong to both of them. Now, don't ask me why there are two type clubs. Kind of like a church split, I guess. Anyway, there's a lot of fellowship to be had and a lot of good information. Their addresses are also listed at the end of the tape. All right, now it's time to hit the road, look at some pretty airplanes, and talk to some very knowledgeable people. We'll begin with a trip to Riverside, California, and the home of one of the most beautiful 195s I've ever seen. My friend Ron Karwacki took a rundown derelict and turned it into a thing of beauty. Ron and his fabulous 195 are well known in classic airplane circles. This year at Oshkosh, his airplane will be prominently displayed at the Vintage Airplane Division headquarters. Like his airplane, his hangar is spotless. We're here in Riverside, California, at Ron Karwacki's hangar, one of the most beautiful hangars I've ever seen, but the important thing about this hangar, it's got one of the most beautiful 195s you'll ever see. This airplane has been on the cover of several magazines, right, Ron?
Yeah.
I remember a private pilot not too long ago.
Last year we were lucky. We got on the EAA magazine from Sun and Fun, and private pilot in September.
How does it feel to be the owner of such a famous 195?
It's hell.
It's hell?
It's hell.
What do you mean? What do you? It can't be.
But I eat it all up.
I'll bet you do. Yeah, I'll tell you, it is a gorgeous airplane. How long have you owned it, Ron?
We've had it 15 years now, going on 16 years this May. We bought it, we were putting together a Stearman, Larry. And we had to have something to fly. I didn't have my license at the time. My airplane partner at the time, he had his license, so we said we went to an air show and we decided we wanted to get a Stearman. So the Stearman wound up being 9 years getting it in the air, but we had to have something we had to fly, and we came across this one up in Apple Valley, up in the high desert, that had been sitting out for quite a while, and of course it didn't look like this.
I was going to say, it obviously was not in this condition.
No, it looked like an old piece of galvanized pipe when we got it.
Yeah. And I understand you have an interesting story about getting checked out in this airplane.
Well, we were in our hangar one day. We had the 195 there. It had been ferried into us, and I had been polishing away on it, trying to clean it up, and this old fellow walked in the hangar one day, and he says, "I understand there's two guys here who have an airplane, they don't know how to fly." Well, old Ted Warner became one of our best friends after that day, and 9.5 hours later, I soloed in this airplane.
And that was how long ago?
That's 15 years ago.
That is amazing, Ron. Most people say you got to have a bunch of tail dragger time and so forth, and I know of two people that have soloed in the airplane, and you're one of them. And it shows it can be done. Now, as a flight instructor, I'm not sure I'd want to take it on, but you had an awfully good flight instructor, and obviously you pretty good native ability.
Well, everybody tells me that being a model airplaner, that had a lot to do, because I knew just what every control surface did and how it should react and what have you, so maybe that helped. Maybe.
Well, as an RC flyer myself, I know that it works that way. An RC flyer has an idea how things work. Now, it doesn't work the other way.
That's very true.
A full-size pilot going back to RC, it doesn't work.
That's very true, and I can give you several stories about that.
I bet you can. I bet you can. Ron, what advice would you give to someone who's looking for a 195 today? What to look for, that sort of thing? Well,
it's a big airplane. I wouldn't let anything stop me from doing it again. Although I would be looking, as far as mechanical, you want to get a good checkout, a good mechanic to look it all over. Because
pre-purchase inspection.
Yeah, but as far as learning how to fly in it, it's a pussycat, but it's just like any other tail dragger. If you get a little bit behind you, it might bite you.
Yeah, okay, but you wouldn't necessarily discourage somebody from buying a 195 just because he didn't have tail dragger time with
Definitely not. I have talked to so many people, and over the years, I've 4 people right in the Southern California area have 195s now, I believe, because I talked them into it.
I think it's important to emphasize at this point a first-class flight instructor. A man that really knows the airplane. That's key. Not necessarily...
man that knows the airplane.
That knows the airplane. Yeah, that's an interesting story, Ron, and I'm glad to hear you talk about it. Well, I'll tell you.
Larry, excuse me, it's the best of all worlds, this airplane. It's big, it's fast, it's comfortable, and it attracts a hell of a lot of attention no matter where it goes.
Amen. I couldn't have said that any better myself. Well, Ron, I really want to thank you for letting us share with you your hangar and your airplane.
Well, thank you very much for coming down. It was good seeing you again.
How about that? Bought a 195 and didn't even know how to fly. Learned to fly in it and soloed in it. That's not impossible. I know 2 or 3 other people who have done that. But it takes a very competent instructor and, of course, a lot of native ability on the part of the pilot. Ron, we must remember, had a considerable amount of experience as a contest radio control pilot. And that does give him some idea of the aerodynamics involved and so forth. I've seen a lot of beautiful 195s around the country, but let me tell you, Ron's is in the top 3 in my opinion. My airplane doesn't look too bad, but it sure doesn't compare with his. Of course, Jenny and I run ours hard and put it away wet sometimes. It's a working airplane after all. Most of the 195s in the country really look a lot better than they did when they left Wichita. Now, let's go take a look at another 195 in the Los Angeles area, an LC-126, a military version. It's owned by Dennis Dugan down in Corona, California. Let's go visit him. In 1949, the Air Force bought 15 LC-126A aircraft, which were delivered with floats and skis. The only structural difference with civilian models was the left side escape hatch. 5 more were purchased for the National Guard in 1951 and were designated the LC-126B. Differing only in radio gear, they were identical to the LC-126A. Finally, in 1952, the Army bought 63 LC-126Cs, which differed from the previous models in that they had a large baggage door for stretcher patients. Folks, I'm here with Dennis Dugan from Corona, California. We're in the beautiful airport at Corona. Dennis flies a 767 normally for American Airlines, got in from Honolulu last night, and I woke him up this morning and drug him down here to show us his beautiful LC-126. Dennis, this is a gorgeous airplane. Tell me about it.
The LC series was originally built for the Army Air Corps. This was one of the last ones built, the C model. It was most distinguished by the big baggage door. They used them for medevac. They could put 2 litters in the back behind the pilots and evacuate out of remote areas. They, as I understood it, were originally supposed to go up to the Pine Tree and do lines, some of our defenses, radar remote sites.
The Army also used the LC-126, and they use them for instrument trainers, mostly out of Fort Rucker and Fort Sill. I'm not really sure how many they had, but they were a total of, 100 LC series built, I think. A total of 100 of them.
I couldn't tell you on that.
Okay, well, Dennis, I sure thank you a lot for showing us this beautiful airplane.
You're welcome.
Boy, I'll tell you, there are a lot of beautiful 195s in the country, but those two are just the tip of the iceberg. I wish Jenny and I had the time and the money to go film them all, but that, of course, is out of the question. But it is time now to go visit one of the finest 195 maintenance and restoration shops in the country. John and Marilyn Collette, Butterfly Aviation in Goodland, Kansas. Let's go. Near the geographical center of the country in the small town of Goodland, Kansas, is located one of the best little FBO operations you're likely to find. What makes this place special is that you'll always find several 195s in various stages of restoration or receiving routine maintenance. John Collette has earned a well-deserved reputation as one of the foremost 195 experts in the country. Well, I'm in John's shop, John Collette's shop. We're standing by Cessna 195 that's being restored, repaired from a ground loop, I presume, right? And it's in the fuselage jig, and the fuselage jig is very important. John, it's sure good to be here with you. You and Ray Woodmansey, I guess, are about the best-known 195 restorers, 195 shops in the business. How do you like working on 195?
Oh, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, you'd like to make a full-time job of it, wouldn't
Right.
you? You have to work on those thrushes and crop dusters back there as your day job, is that right?
Well, more or less, yes. Well, I work on these probably more than I do them personally, but
yeah. And how many do you have in the shop right now undergoing restoration?
yeah, we've had 3 right now. One is flying at this time, just ready to go home.
Okay, tell me, what is important for a new owner or a prospective owner to look for when he wants a 195?
Well, just overall condition. When we do a pre-buy check on one, we get asked to do that occasionally. We usually run a compression check and just look for oil leaks and any sorts of trouble up there. If we go back into the fuselage, we look for specifically a crack in a doorpost. That seems to be an ailment that they develop over years.
Now, that's about the most important thing, isn't it, to look for?
That's one of the most obvious or critical things, and it takes quite a bit of time and effort to fix. A wing has to be removed and the doorpost pulled out. To show kind of where that goes, the doorpost, this is the one we have out, but it goes right up through here.
Okay.
And the crack develops right up here in this bend area.
Okay.
And cracks back around that member. And if it gets very far, it's got to be replaced. We do have a reinforcement we use.
Now that thing comes all the way down here, doesn't it?
It comes clear to the gearbox.
Okay, so it's not a pre-flight item or a 100-hour item to replace it, is it?
No. To see it, you have to take out some upholstery piece up there, which is just a couple screws in the air vent slide piece. And you can see right in there where it's at. But people miss it. Look right at it and don't see it. So
I think it's very, very important for somebody know what have somebody that he knows what he's looking for to inspect that. But that's something that a prospective owner should really have checked out very closely, right?
Yes.
Now, I understand you have a fix for that, if it's not too bad.
Well, if it's not cracked but just barely getting started, we have a stainless steel reinforcement that's been a heat-treated piece of stainless that goes underneath the skin, and you don't even see it once it's installed. And I even recommend that goes in if you put in a new doorpost.
Okay.
That you put it in before it cracks.
Okay.
And then it should. We've never seen one crack that's had one installed, and the ones we have put in with a crack, we have not seen the crack progress.
Now, you have to pull the wing to put that plate in?
Yes.
Okay. So it's still quite a job.
Yeah, I'm going to take the wing off just so you get to the rivets. If there's a way to shoot those rivets, you might get it in there.
All right. Now, what else, from an airframe standpoint, is particularly critical to determine the condition of?
Well, some things that, not just on a pre-buy necessarily, but even on your 100-hour annuals, the brake linings, hoses under the floor from your master cylinders down to the solid aluminum lines, some of these have not been changed since '47. And they need to be changed at some point. And we've found some really in bad shape. I don't know if I've heard of any bursting or not, but they're not terribly hard to change. They're not fun, but they're not